The 2024 NFL Draft begins tonight. What's going to happen? Who will the Jets pick? Let's figure it out today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Thursday, April 25th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoyed the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. Well, today we're going to talk about the NFL Draft. Things get underway tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch it on ESPN. You can watch it on NFL Network. You can just follow along online. I don't know that the analysis you get on these shows on TV is really all that great. But no matter how you watch it, happy Draft Day, and welcome to Draft Day. The New York Jets begin draft day owning the 10th overall pick. Will they pick at 10? Will they trade up? Will they trade down? Who will they pick? Well, we don't know. We won't find out any of the answers to those questions until tonight, but we can try and decipher these things. And that's what we're going to do on today's episode. Now, at 10, what the Jets do will obviously be determined by what the teams in front of them do. And it seems like the first three picks are pretty much locked to be quarterbacks. The Bears are going to take Caleb Williams, number 1 overall out of USC. The Commanders are going to take a quarterback. Will it be Drake May? Will it be Jalen Daniels? We don't know. And whichever quarterback the Commanders don't take, New England's probably going to take. And, I'm all for New England taking a quarterback this year, because if I was running the Patriots, I would not take a quarterback. If I was running New England, I would trade down, because that offense just lacks any sort of talent. And we've seen it, and it's because we've lived it with the Jets. Like, what happens when you put a rookie quarterback who really doesn't know what he's doing. And very few rookie quarterbacks step into the lineup and have a good sense of how to play the game on the NFL level. When you throw them into a situation where there's no infrastructure at all, they usually fail. Usually just becomes a snowball effect where a guy who might be successful in a decent situation gets thrown into an impossible spot and fails. So I think that's probably what's going to happen with New England when they draft a quarterback. If I were New England, I'd look to trade down. I'd look to recoup. I'd look to add to my draft capital, build up the team, and get the quarterback another year. I don't think they're going to do it, though. The interesting part of the draft begins at 4 with Arizona, because they could go in a couple different directions. The chalk pick would be Marvin Harrison Jr., but they could also trade down. I mean, there have been some rumblings that some teams have Malik Neighbors rated equally, if not a little bit better than Harrison. If Arizona is one of those teams, you've seen a few mock drafts recently that have suggested maybe they trade down a spot or two. Maybe they trade down even further to recoup extra picks. And if they really like Neighbors as high as much as they like Harrison, I saw a couple mocks yesterday that suggested maybe the Giants move up from 6 to 4. That would still allow Arizona to draft to draft Neighbors. The Giants could move up for a quarterback. There's been a lot of buzz about Arizona trading this pick and quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, 4, potentially J.J. McCarthy out of Michigan going 4th overall. So the draft really begins for me at the 4th pick with Arizona, because with Arizona, we know 3 quarterbacks are probably going off the board at the very top of the draft. The 4th pick is kind of what sets into motion the chain of events that will determine what the Jets do at 10. Then at 5, you have the Chargers with Jim Harbaugh there. Chargers are kind of overhauling things. They're just kind of, it feels like this is kind of a reset year for the Chargers. Harbaugh just took over. They shed a bunch of veterans. They shed a bunch of big names, including Mike Williams, who of course signed with the Jets. And, Harbaugh is kind of instilling his vision for that team. And over the last 24 hours, there's been an incredible amount of buzz about the Chargers potentially wanting J.C. Latham, the tackle out of Alabama. And that's coming out of nowhere. It reminds me a bit of 2 years ago when we went through the whole pre-draft process. We went 4 months, and you didn't really hear much about the Jets and Sauce Gardner. And then maybe 3 days before the draft, suddenly it was everywhere that the Jets wanted Sauce Gardner, that the Jets were taking Sauce Gardner at 4 if he was there. It reminds me of that a little bit. And sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes teams are like good at keeping things under the radar, and then there's a leak like at the last minute, and then like everybody knows who you want. It could also be a smokescreen. The Chargers could also go in another direction. And there have also been rumors the Chargers want to trade down. And in a world where somebody trades up to 4 with Arizona and takes a quarterback, this is the first spot where people have suggested that maybe the Jets could look to trade up. If the Jets want Marvin Harrison Jr. and he's still on the board at 5, maybe they make a deal. And it's also been pointed out that Joe Douglas worked with the Chargers general manager when the two of them were together in Baltimore, which doesn't necessarily mean they're going to strike a trade, but personal relationships really matter in moments like this in the NFL. Like it really is a league where guys are comfortable working with people that they know. And I know like people, you could scoff at the notion that like the Jets and Chargers would strike a trade just because Douglas worked with the Chargers GM. And they won't do that only because of that. But if you have a good relationship with another GM in this league, you tend to be more likely to make a deal with them because you trust them. You trust that they're not going to try and screw you over. You trust that they're going to offer you a fair deal. And whether or not that's, the way it should be, I don't know. But that's the way sometimes it is. And I will say that, there are the two rumors out there with the Chargers. One is that they want J.C. Latham. The other is that they want to trade down. Those two kind of mesh pretty well because if you want J.C. Latham, obviously you can never guarantee a guy's going to fall. If you have a guy rated number 1 on your board, there might be another one of the 32 teams that has him rated highly on your board, so you can't guarantee you're going to get him. But there's a pretty good chance J.C. Latham is going to be there later in the first round. There's a pretty good chance that the Chargers might be the only team that want him that high, and if that's the case, that's the situation where you trade down because you can still get the guy you want and you can get extra picks. So that's a really interesting one with the Chargers. What will they do at 5? The Giants, I mean, there's a lot of buzz about the Giants wanting a quarterback. I mean, it seems like at this point it's a virtual lock that 4 quarterbacks are going in the top 10. And this would seem to be on paper, the thing that's bad about doing the draft day show is that your takes can age very poorly, very quickly. So, 12 hours from now, these takes will be completely moot. And, a show on a day like today has a very, very short shelf life. Tomorrow's show, when we break down what the Jets will do, it will have a longer shelf life. But one would think that the floor for J.J. McCarthy would be the Giants at 6, based on the buzz that we've got right now. That's not always the case, but it could be. At 7, Tennessee, there's some buzz about Tennessee wanting a receiver, but that seems to be like the floor for Joe Alt out of Notre Dame. It just feels like that's where the buzz is. It could be Neighbors if he's there, but there's a lot of buzz about the Titans, wanting a tackle, wanting Joe Alt. I would think that Joe Alt does not fall past 7. At 8, there's another Atlanta. Atlanta could go defense. And if Atlanta's going to go defense, that might be another spot where the Jets look to trade up. And, we could, again, debate whether or not it's a good idea. I think trading up to 8 would just be a completely self-defeating move. I think that it's a panic move. I think it shows a lack of discipline when you trade up 2 spots in the first round in a situation like this. But if the Jets get a little anxious and they want a Rome Odunze to go they see he's there at 8, that could be a spot where the Jets look to trade up. And Atlanta is a team that, this is a draft where the top 10 is skewed very heavily towards the offense. Atlanta is a team that could go defense. They could go Dallas Turner out of Atlanta, so they could be amenable to a trade down because the Jets are obviously going offense. And then at 9, you have the Chicago Bears, their second first-round pick. That's another spot. That's another team that could look to trade down. This is like a team that under the radar could be a trade down candidate. And I hate the trade up. I hate the 1-spot trade up in the first round, but that's another spot where it could happen because even though the Bears have 2 of the top 10 picks, they don't really have that much draft capital outside of those 2 picks. So that would be a very lot. And we know they're taking Caleb Williams number 1 overall. So that could be a spot where they could entice the Jets to trade up 1 spot, or it could be a spot where some team tries to jump the Jets for a Dunze. So that kind of lays out where the Jets are as the day begins. Now, head on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about what we should root for, what would be the best case scenario for the New York Jets. There are a couple that look really good, but generally speaking, there are some things Jets fans should be rooting for tonight, and we'll go into what they are continuing here on this Thursday draft day edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monopoly Go. You know, we've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime and the scoreboard's not looking good. You're feeling low, not sure you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep. You lift up your head and you say to yourself, time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much of my friend's money as possible. Of course, I'm talking about Monopoly Go. It's the smash hit mobile game. It lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. There's so much to do. You can play on countless dynamic Monopoly boards. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players rent for your iconic properties. And if you want to, I guess you can actually work with your friends to crack open community chests and in tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So get back out there, put on your game face, and download Monopoly Go, now free at the App Store or Google Play. Monopoly Go. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to grand slams, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. We're having a little like sports renaissance in New York. Right now, we've got the Knicks in the playoffs, we've got the Rangers in the playoffs, the Islanders in the playoffs, Yankees and Mets baseball season's underway, and of course the NFL draft is worth watching tonight. But again, on FanDuel right now you can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. So you can bet on everything. If you're rooting for one of the local teams and you want to make a little money, FanDuel's the place to go. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, it's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you every day, as this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. If you're a fan of Locked On Jets, let me tell you about the Locked On Sports Today channel. Are you tired of watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You probably have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And who knows, maybe a familiar face will make an appearance on that channel today. Today on Locked On Jets, we are focused on the NFL draft. Things get underway tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch it on ESPN, NFL Network. You can watch it on your phone. I mean, you can just follow along. You can pull up some like sports network app and just follow along. You know, I don't know that there's really much gained by watching the draft, watching like the analysis done by the analysts at the desk. But if you like ESPN or NFL Network, feel free to watch that. What's going to happen with the New York Jets? Well, none of us know. None of us have a crystal ball. But there are certain things to watch, and there are also certain things you could root for if you're a New York Jets fan. Now, I think one thing you don't want to see, and this is, I don't feel 100% confident on this, but we go back and forth through the offseason. You ask yourself, do you want to see a bunch of quarterbacks go high, or do you want to see a quarterback fall? And the reason you might want to see quarterbacks go high is that, right or wrong, and I would argue wrong, the Jets are probably not even going to consider a quarterback at 10. So if players your team aren't considering go ahead of you, that's a good thing because it pushes down players who you might want. The counter to this is if a quarterback falls, it's a possibility that some team may call up the Jets if that player is available at 10 and offer just an unbelievable package. Teams typically pay over the typical going rate for quarterbacks. Teams overpay for a quarterback. So if a quarterback falls to 10, the Jets could end up getting a great deal. I mean, the Jets conceivably could get a future first-round pick just to move down in the first round if a team wants to move up for a quarterback. So you have these competing factors going against each other. But I think here's the thing. If the fourth quarterback in this year's class falls, and I think we were pretty much set on quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3 this year. If the fourth quarterback falls, somebody's probably going to trade up before 10 because we've laid out the teams that may want to move down. Arizona is a possible trade down candidate. The Chargers, all this buzz about J.C. Latham and the Chargers wanting to move down. Again, those two are connected. I'm convinced that if the Chargers actually want Latham, I believe that they would try and move down because they're probably going to do the calculus and realize we could get Latham later on. So and we could keep going on. We talked about Atlanta. Atlanta may want a defensive player, so they're a candidate to trade down because the top half of this draft is very, very slanted towards the offensive side of the ball. And if somebody who wants to trade up, they're probably looking for an offensive player. And if it's a quarterback, Atlanta could get a big package. Chicago, we went over. Chicago owns picks 1 and 9. They don't own much after that, though. So it would be a pretty obvious move for the Bears to look to trade down to get out of the 9th pick. They're picking Williams number 1 overall. The Bears don't have a lot of picks after that, though. So that's a perfect spot to trade down, especially if some team's going to offer you a big package for a quarterback. So my guess is that if the 4th quarterback falls, it's not going to be a situation that somebody's going to trade up before we get to 10. They're not going to wait till the Jets pick at 10 if you love a quarterback. You'll have an opportunity to trade up with a number of partners who seem like very logical fits. So I think you want to see the quarterbacks go early. Could some team look to trade up for the 5th quarterback in this year's class? I guess it's possible, but that's not really going to impact the Jets. What happens with the first 4 quarterbacks is not going to impact the Jets if they go early. It could impact the Jets, if it's not going to help the Jets if the 4th quarterback falls to 10, because the 4th quarterback's probably not going to fall to 10. It's probably not a realistic scenario. Another thing to root for is just defensive players to go early. You hope if there's a reach, it's for a defensive player, because Jets are probably not taking defense. I'm going to use the word probably here because last year, nobody was expecting the Jets to go defense. All the smart money was on the Jets to take a tackle last year. And, maybe they would have had all the top tier tackles not going off the board before they picked. And of course, a year ago was when they made the Rodgers trade and they made that fateful pick swap in the first round. They had the 13th pick and they moved down 2 slots. They switched picks with Green Bay, who had pick 15. So Green Bay ended up with 13, Jets ended up with 15. And what happened? Well, at 14, New England traded down and Pittsburgh traded up for Broderick Jones, who was kind of like the last tackle in the top tier of last year's class. You never know exactly what's going to happen, but it would be an upset. It would be an even bigger shock than last year if the Jets went defense. And again, if there are players you're not interested in, you want them to go above you. You want the teams picking above you to take players you're not interested in, because that pushes players you're interested in down the board. And if we're talking about a scenario where the Jets can get like a Rome Odunze, if he falls all the way to 10 and you don't have to trade up, something unexpected is going to have to happen. And that something unexpected could also be J.C. Latham going early to the Chargers. This was a surprising development. And it's not that J.C. Latham's an awful prospect. Like, I think that people are actually a little too hard on him. I think he's got a couple things working against him that like people overestimate the impact of. One of them is that he went to Alabama. And if you look in recent history, Alabama prospects who've gotten first round grades on the offensive line have really struggled upon entering the NFL. Another aspect is the game people saw the most of him was the Rose Bowl. And if you watch the Rose Bowl and you don't watch a lot of college football otherwise, you watch Michigan's defensive front destroy Alabama's offensive line. It happened through the game, but it also happened on like the biggest play of the game. The play where Michigan stopped Alabama on the goal line in overtime to win it. Latham got destroyed on that play. But, there's only one. When we talk about Latham going to Alabama, well, I understand the arguments because like the Alabama coaching staff's really good. So you could make the case that they get more out of their offensive line than their talent would suggest. I also understand he played poorly in that game against Michigan on the last play, but you always scout the player. You don't scout the school. I mean, a year ago, everybody was saying Ohio State quarterbacks, Ohio State quarterbacks, Ohio State quarterbacks. Well, CJ Stroud entered the league and looked pretty good. Past prospects' failures, just because they play the same position and went to the same school as somebody else who failed, not terribly relevant. And taking it a step beyond that, the Michigan game matters, but it is only one game. You never scout a player solely on one game. That said, I think Latham's a bit of a project, and I don't think he's a guy the Jets should consider at 10. So from that standpoint, even though I think he's got a better shot to be a good player than a lot of other people do, I still would worry about it. I still don't think he'd be very enticing at 10. So that's a guy he could push. Again, he could push some of these guys down the board, and maybe that's the scenario where the Jets get Rome Odunze at 10. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to the New York Jets. We always talk about the Jets here. Locked On Jets, that's the name of the show. What will the Jets ultimately do? Depends on a couple of factors, and we'll talk about what they are as we continue here on this Thursday draft day edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you are hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. So the Jets have it easy. They have the NFL draft. They can just pick the prospect that they want. Not so easy for your small business, and that's where LinkedIn comes in. LinkedIn is not just a jobs board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even launched a feature that helps you write the job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Thursday. The NFL draft begins tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, ESPN NFL Network. What will the New York Jets do? And I think there are a couple of questions that will determine the answer to this question. A lot of it's going to be based on what happens in front of them. We've spent the show laying out the scenarios that could determine what the Jets do. But there are some other internal questions the New York Jets have. I think the first question is, what does their draft board look like? Which I guess is a pretty obvious question. You talk about what a team does in the NFL draft, but I think it's especially significant when we talk about whether the Jets will look to trade up, because there has been some buzz about the Jets potentially looking to trade up. I think a trade up would be very difficult to justify, to be honest with you. Jets are sitting at 10. That's a spot where you should be able to find a great prospect no matter who goes in front of you. 10th overall pick. There are going to be more than 9 blue chip prospects in this draft. So if you can't find a great player at 10, I think I don't know what you're doing. And there are scenarios where a trade up is justified. But if you look at the big picture for the New York Jets, this is a team that's really, really pushed the envelope, is really trying to maximize things in the short term. And it's frequently come at the expense of the long run. It's like, how many assets can you give up? How many future assets can you give up? I mean, if you actually look at the old Cowboys draft chart, which is not necessarily the most accurate when it comes to judging the true value of picks, what you can truly expect, but it is like kind of the currency of the league. It is kind of the measure of what the league judges picks worth. The Jets, if let's say they wanted to trade up to 5 with the Chargers, the Jets could give up every pick that they own in this year's draft right now and still not have enough to get all the way up to 5. So we're talking about more future picks going out the door. And, I guess if a trade up to 8 or 9 would not be as costly, but you're only moving up 2 spots and you're giving up assets just to move up like a spot or two when the guy you want could very well fall to you. I think a trade up like 1 or 2 spots would show, for me, like, I'm just speaking for myself, I think that would show in 99% of the cases, it would show a lack of discipline. I hate this trade where you only move up 1 spot. And I don't really love the trade where you only move up 2 spots, because you're not really increasing your chances of finding a great player. But, it depends on what the Jets draft board looks like. If the Jets only have a handful of what they deem blue chip prospects on their board and they want to go up and get one, that's possible. How much do the Jets actually value trying to find at least a little bit of balance? Again, they pushed the envelope so much on the here and now. Would they possibly try and find a little bit, try and think of their future a little bit by trading down and maybe adding some extra draft picks, adding some picks in that critical 2, 3, 4, second, third, fourth round range? That's something worth asking. I think another question is, how do they view this tackle position? Partially, how confident are they in their 2 33-year-old tackles to stay healthy? And I think the answer with Tyron Smith is that you hope for the best, but hope's not a strategy. This is a guy who's been consistently injured through his career. And you would not draft a guy at 10 specifically just to be a backup in year 1. You would not draft a guy only for the purposes of insurance. But the Jets also have longer term questions at the tackle position, where Smith and Moses, both 33 years old, both unsigned for 2025. So you essentially heading into an offseason next year where you need to fill both tackle spots. That's not so easy. I know the Jets did it this year, and we'll see how it works out. But you don't want to go back. You don't want to have a second straight season where you have 2 tackle spots to fill heading into the offseason. But again, how far are the Jets looking to push the envelope right now? Do they feel comfortable rolling the dice with what they've got and rolling the dice that these guys can stay healthy? How much will Rodgers impact this? I mean, there have been some rumors out there that Rodgers wants another pass catcher. He's not so focused on getting another tackle in here. These are questions that will ultimately determine what the New York Jets do. And then I guess one final question is, how do the New York Jets view Brock Bowers? Do they view him as like a once in a decade type tight end prospect? Do they view him as a guy who's going to be one of the top tight ends in the NFL? Will he be like a top 3 tight end? Will he be a guy who's a perennial Pro Bowler? Will he be a guy who's a first or second team All Pro in a good season? We've been over this a lot on this podcast. If you're an everydayer, you've heard me talk about it extensively. To justify drafting a tight end in the top 10, and the numbers show us this, it really has to be like one of those top 2 to 3 tight ends in the NFL. Maybe 4th or 5th, I guess, but I mean, the tight ends who produce at the level that justify a top 10 pick, if you look at like the receiving statistics, there just aren't that many of them. There are guys who can have a career year and look really good and justify it for a year, but over the long run, over 5, 6, 7, 8 years, there aren't many tight ends who produce consistently in this league. Do the Jets think Brock Bowers can be one of them? Do the Jets think Brock Bowers is that rare tight end who's kind of a mismatch problem? Tight end is not necessarily an issue per se for the Jets, because like tight ends just not in a very important position. There really aren't many teams that have good tight ends. Most teams have tight ends who really are subpar receivers and subpar blockers. And the Jets don't really. Jets tight end room's not spectacular with Tyler Conklin and Jeremy Ruckert, but it's not the type of. If you're talking about what the issues were on the team last year, why their offense struggled so much, I don't think you'd really look to the tight end position. That said, I mean, there are a handful of tight ends in this league who make a difference, because a great tight end is a matchup nightmare. And the question is, how do the Jets think Brock Bowers could be that guy? And the question is also, are they thinking short term? Because if you're drafting Brock Bowers, there's also an argument that he becomes like de facto the number 3 receiver, and the Jets don't really have a number 3 receiver right now. I guess you could say Lazard is, maybe Xavier Gipson is. Those aren't spectacular options. So in the short run, if you're really, really focused on the short run, maybe that's an argument on Bowers' behalf. These are the things that will ultimately determine who the New York Jets pick tonight. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Thursday, everybody. Enjoy the draft. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about what the Jets did.